Hey guys, this is Jody with Only Have One Life to Live, and today we're going to show you how I troubleshot a DC electrical problem that I was having on our Forrest River Riverstone Legacy 42 FSKG fifth wheel. Hey guys, we're getting started today, and I thought I would take you through a real quick, easy diagram, hopefully to understand some of the electrical conduits, if you will, within the Riverstone Legacy 42 FSKG. I've had a problem recently that I'll describe here in just a moment, and this video showed you how I went about troubleshooting this particular issue. I am not a licensed electrician. I've worked with low voltage and high voltage sort of all my life, so I know a little bit about it. If you're not comfortable working with AC and DC power, certainly recommend that you hire somebody to help you understand and solve some of those problems for you. As always, anything that you might need is in the description below, so be sure to look down in the description for all the parts and pieces that I might have used. I would appreciate you guys doing that and clicking on any links that we put down there. That certainly helps us as you order things through our links over to affiliate services with Amazon and other partners. So here's how I went about troubleshooting. So here's a quick introduction to our electrical system. We have a solar panel, we have batteries, we have a 120 volt converter to 12 volt DC, we have the fuse panel, we have various fuses, and we have a positive bus bar. There's also the chassis ground. You may know that most RVs that are fairly large in size, bigger than a pop-up anyway, certainly have at least two sources and sometimes three sources of power. Most campers come with a DC power, and that's your batteries that power lights and radios and pumps and things of that nature. And then you normally have at least one electrical power source. That could be 110 or 240, that could be 30 or 50 amp services or more. And then sometimes they have a third source of power, and that's the generator. And the generator typically mimics the power that you would receive from a pedestal so that you have full service in the event of a power outage. So in this coach, we don't have a generator. All we have is a battery source. We have solar power that charges our batteries that provide the source of energy itself for all of our DC lights and pumps and things of that nature, our 12 volt systems. And then we have a 240 volt 50 amp pedestal service where we connect to shore power, if you will, and then that 240 volts splits into two 120 volt lines to provide services inside the RV for things such as TVs like you see behind us, or the refrigerator that we have, the residential refrigerator, and those types of things. Not to confuse you, but we also have an inverter which takes DC power from the batteries and changes that to 120 volt power, so that on days where we are traveling between locations, we can use the batteries to power the refrigerator, so that the refrigerator is completely powered during our travel days and trips. That keeps all of our produce and meats and freezer and everything from defrosting during that process. So the inverter takes DC voltage when you turn it to the inverter mode, and it runs from the batteries to the inverter, or inverts the electrical DC power from DC to AC, and provides 120 volt AC service to the refrigerator. So that's a very quick summary of the components that we're going to be talking about today. The way this works is the solar panel provides 12 volt DC power to the batteries to charge the batteries. That's the only purpose of the solar power in this particular coach as it comes from the manufacturer, unless you've ordered additional options. We only have one solar panel, so that's one 190 or 190 watt solar panel on top that provides 12 volts to the batteries. We have two batteries from the manufacturer, and we added two more, but for simplicity we're only going to show two here. And we've got two 12 volt 100 amp hour batteries. The positive off of the batteries feed the positive bus bar. The positive bus bar feeds the battery disconnect, and the battery disconnect feeds the fuse panel inside the coach by the steps. The power at the pedestal is 240 volt VACs, which is two 120 volt lines for AC current, and line 1 connects to the AC to DC converter, and then of course line 1 and line 2 connect to the fuse panel inside the RV on a 50 amp breaker. The thing we would have happen is the power would go out at the pedestal momentarily, and we would lose all power in the coach. And we thought that strange because DC power powers all of the lights and the 12 volt appliances like the radio and those types of things in the coach, but all of them would go out, including the control panel that manages the the lights and the pumps and all those kinds of things in the RV. Didn't think much of it at that point because we thought maybe because of the lightning strikes around us and those types of things that that it was related to just the switchover, if you will, between AC to DC conversions. Maybe something like that was going on. And we didn't really think much of it at the time. But when we really found out there was a problem was one morning about 5 a.m. We were getting ready to leave the campsite, had all the slides in, everything was ready to go with the exception of simply pulling out the power, and we had to connect the RV to the truck. And when we pulled the power from the pedestal, all of the DC power inside the coach went off. Still didn't quite hit me at that point because at that time all I saw was outside the scare lights went off, and I thought, well, I was working outside, so I thought when I pulled the power, it's one of those conversion things again. But when I went to reel the powered electrical cable in, I noticed there's no DC power because the reel wouldn't work. And that got me thinking, I wonder if the rest of the DC power is off. And it wasn't just the act of me pulling power out, like has been sort of happening in the past couple times we've had some power outages at the park. I thought maybe there's more to this. So I went inside and started looking, and sure enough, all of the DC power was off when I unplugged the 120 volt AC, which is like, that doesn't make sense. At the time, I didn't even understand that, probably shame on me, but I didn't understand that that there was a 120 volt AC to DC converter in the coach. I probably should have known that, but I didn't at the time. So I started investigating and reading some of the manuals and trying to figure out what happened. And here is sort of what we found. As always, if you're not comfortable dealing with electrical, you should make sure you hire a licensed electrician. I am not a licensed electrician, though I've dealt with a lot of low voltage and high voltage power over the years. I have a grounding, if you will, no pun intended, of understanding of electrical principles, and I can apply those and use multimeters and those types of things. A very basic level of electrical knowledge is all I have. So make sure you hire yourself a licensed electrician if you're not comfortable with troubleshooting some of these things. Okay guys, so what we found is when power was plugged into the pedestal, we had 12 volt electricity going to the fuse panel. So we traced, when power was plugged in at the pedestal, we traced the power back through the AC converter to 12 volt DC, and that 12 volt DC through a 100 amp fuse, and then over to the fuse panel, and everything had power. We were squared away as long as power was plugged in and power was present and working properly at the pedestal. However, anytime you pulled that power away and you broke this link here, anytime that link was severed and it wasn't making it to the converter, we had no DC power in the coach. So that obviously is a problem. And in testing, what we found was power was good here at the batteries, measuring each one of them. Power was good up here at the positive bus bar. However, on this 50 amp fuse here, that was feeding this, frankly, two more fuses. There was a fuse here, a watertight fuse here, and this 100 amp fuse here, and then the battery disconnect behind that. Battery disconnect was in the proper position, was turned on. However, there was no power leading through this link. And the reason is because this fuse, this 50 amp fuse, was no longer working properly. So we had to replace that fuse, and the way we went about finding that fuse and troubleshooting that fuse is what we'll show you next in the video. But this was effectively broken. This link right here on that fuse, this link was broken right here. And in fact, it was broken so badly that in the fuse, when I pulled this fuse out and you shake it, you can hear it rattle. So, you know, the fuses are supposed to be fused together. There should be no movement in the fuse, but it was rattling around, indicating not only audibly you could hear it, but you could feel it in the fuse as well. And then when you put the test meter on it, confirmed that the fuse was actually bad. So when this fuse was broken, then no power would come from this bus bar through this fuse, down through this watertight fuse, down through this 100 amp fuse to the battery disconnect and into the fuse panel if the power from the power pedestal was bad. The coach had no power whatsoever. As long as power was plugged in, this circuit was made, and you could get power to the coach. And so anytime power was good here, this line was connected here, and you had power going to the fuse panel. If you unplug this power and disconnected it, then power would come through the DC system, and this fuse was broken and did not feed the fuse panel. So this is why every time this pedestal was unplugged, power was not coming from the DC lead down to this fuse panel. And so that's what was happening. Power would go out of the pedestal because of a lightning strike, or because of a power outage, or whatever the case may be, or because I unplugged it, and this link was broken, providing power down to the fuse panel from the battery source. So we'll get you into how we troubleshot that specific problem and identified that as being the issue. Also, in the process of testing, I started taking some of the components apart. And when I took this one cable off of the main 100 amp bus, this connector just sort of fell off. That shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be able to pry this off with your hand, much less pull it off if it's crimped properly. So I found that this, even though crimped, was done poorly at the manufacturer, and that just came off in my hand, literally by pulling it off the bus. So that was a potential area there could have been a problem in the future with a loose connection like that. So I had a new cable made, and I went to the marine supply place that is Key West Marine Hardware. If you find yourself in Key West and then you need RV electrical supplies, come down to Key West Marine, or Los Cubanitos as it's known here locally, and you'll be able to find just about anything that you need here. It's just across from the aquarium, and you're gonna find everything you need here. These guys are super great, so be sure you come down and see these guys. We've reached out online, and several of you have replied to the frog group that we have for Forrest River owner group. But we've encountered a problem that I guess nobody else has had yet, and it's a weird sort of situation. When you unplug the power from the pedestal outside, all of the DC power inside goes off. There are some components that are on the battery side of the bus, if you will, that remain powered, but everything on the other side of the battery bus, or the fuse, goes off. We went outside and we started investigating, and I started at the batteries and worked my way back. And the batteries were completely charged, putting out 13.87 to 13 plus volts of electricity. I went from the batteries to the inside, and on the Forrest River in the generator bay, on the side away from the generator, there's an open area which I'll show you, and that's where it's right next to the battery box that's on the outside. That's where all the power comes in from the batteries. Right behind this panel, the little hole here, you can bend that back and you can pull this out. I usually start from the top. It's easier to get this to come out from the top. And there exposed is all of your bus bars. Here are the grounds down here, or the negative sides where they ground to the chassis. So you want to always make sure that you are connected to a chassis ground. Just simply connecting to the chassis may not be a ground because it could be painted and you may not have bare metal contact. So keep that in mind. If you've got a painted surface, you may not be able to get a ground just simply by touching to the metal pieces there, simply because it's painted and there's not a good contact with the actual metal. These are the bus bars, and that amp, that 50 amp fuse right here is what blew and caused the problems that I have. You have 100 amp up here, that's a fuse there. You have a 200 amp fuse there. You have an 80 amp fuse here. And then each one of these little gray or black or silver metallic things up under here, these are all fuses. And I found a power bus strip there. And that power bus strip, as I started to use my multimeter to check voltage, I checked every single spot that there was a bus connection, and all of them had 13.87 volts. Almost consistently, except for one. And the one that I found that did not was 13.40 volts. Now, I'm not suggesting that's any indication that there's a problem, but I thought that's odd that 13.87 volts is on every single other post except the one post that's feeding electricity. And so what I did is I took that one post and I pulled the lead off. So I started looking at the fuses that were along the bus. And I took two fuses and pulled them off. The ones that I suspected was this 50 amp fuse, which was what I thought was bad. I didn't know at the time. I pulled it off and I pulled the one next to it off, which was this one. It's a 30 amp. You can't swap those out, but as a test, I wanted to make sure, number one, these were fuses, because it was kind of hard to tell the way they were installed. But these little things are fuses, and in this case, it's a 2-post 50 amp fuse. And again, when you shake it, it makes a sound. So that's wrong. Shouldn't make a sound. It should be more solid like this one. Makes no sound when you shake it. And again, verified by the ohm meter, that the multimeter, that this is in fact a broken fuse. So I'm going to replace this fuse, and I think that'll solve all of my worries. So I've got my handy dandy voltmeter here, and I'm going to do some quick resistance testings. You can do this a couple of ways. On your multimeter, you might have a setting that looks like an upside down horseshoe, and that measures ohms or resistance. You might have one that also has like a little audible symbol beside it. Mine is over here, so I can turn there, and basically what that does is it will emit a beep whenever my leads are connected together. Hopefully you can hear that beep. And when I break the leads, the sound goes away. And that indicates that there is a circuit going all the way through the link. So what I found here is this is a fuse that is serviced by the main bus, positive bus, coming from the battery. And when you shake it, it's very solid. Doesn't feel like anything's loose. It doesn't feel like something's not connected. And when I connect my two leads to the two things here, you can hear that there's a circuit passing through. So that means that is a good fuse. Or at least it means that there is connectivity from one stud or one post on this fuse to the second post, which means current will pass through it. Here is a fuse, though, that I found that is blown. In this case, it's a 50 amp fuse and it's 12 volt. And when you shake it, you can tell something's not right. It's shaking around inside and you can audibly hear it shaking. And when I apply my meter here to it, I don't get any continuity between one post to the other. I can apply it to the same post. I can put my black lead and red lead on the same post and I hear continuity. But I don't hear it when I apply it to the other lead. So that means there's no continuity from one post to the second post. And that's a problem. That's a blown fuse. This is a 50 amp fuse, as I mentioned, for 12 volt. This is a 30 amp fuse. Let's see if I can turn that the right way. Stamped upside down. This is a 30 amp fuse. As you can tell, it's a 12 volt 30A at the end there, 30 amp fuse. So you can't replace the 50 amp fuse with a 30 amp fuse. That would be very bad and cause a fire potentially. So we have to go get some replacement 50 amp fuses. Okay guys, so as I mentioned before, I've got a 50 amp 12 volt fuse here. It's the one that's rattles whenever you shake it, and we've tested on the multimeter as being bad and confirmed that. I've got a replacement here. It's a Cole, I don't know if you can see that, a Cole Hersey, C-O-L-E-H-E-R-S-E-E company. The part number is 355-50BP. It's a 50 amp circuit breaker, type 1, and it's got 2 poles on it. And these are stamped on the side as well. So if you lose the box, you can see the stamping on the side. Most of them, again, are stamped on the side. So you want to make sure that when you replace something, you replace it with the appropriate amperage. Again, if you're not comfortable, guys, working with the appropriate DC and electrical voltage, you should really hire a professional. I'm not a professional. This is just how I did it, okay? But I'm going to take this fuse, I'm going to insert it back into the place where that 50 amp is, and then we're going to go from there. All right, guys, stay tuned. Okay, so as previously mentioned, when I come out here and turn the power off at the pedestal, there's no power inside the RV. But when I turn this off, there should be DC power inside the RV. I just turned off the 120, so it's no longer converting to 12 volt. But inside, I should have power. And as you see, now that I've turned the AC off, I still have DC power. All of my lights are still on. My control panel is still on. Turn our power back on at the pedestal, and we should be AJ squared away and good to go. Another electrical repair by Jody, successful. We hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time.